Volume 6 C20. Do not say a word. A beautiful voice caressed his ear and brought Astraka's eyes flying open. Assassin. He wanted to cry out, but he found that, though he could blink, and he could move his lips, only a whisper emerged beyond them. You're good looking, for a human, I mean, Ileana said and stood up over the paralyzed Duke. His eyes widened further, he tried to speak louder. An elf? I thought we'd have to take care of them before going north, but it shouldn't have been that hard. How did one get in here? He wanted to demand answers, but again, he was whispering so low that he couldn't even hear himself. She seemed not to mind. You're probably wondering how I got in here, she said and put a finger over his lips. Just say I'm a magic caster with high stealth skills and leave it at that. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you now know I can get to you. Blink if you understand how important to your future that is. Astraka blinked. Good, it's the same reason you can't really move much. Ileana made the cryptic statement, then asked, may I sit? She didn't wait for an answer, but instead pulled a chair away from a nearby table, drew it to his bedside, and sat down as if it were her own. I know you think you have to deal with my people, before you can go north, but I'm going to offer you an alternative, a better option. Wouldn't it be convenient for you if you had the finest scouts, rangers, woodsmen, and archers in the kingdom? Don't you think that might provide an excellent advantage over the queen? She asked. His widening eyes told her he understood. Good looking, and smart, aren't we a winner in life? She chuckled at that. So I can skip the market pitch and jump straight to the offer. When Mark is dead. Everybody who owned us is dead. We will never be owned again. If you try to put us down in the forests, we will hunt you all. It won't be months, it will be years trying to finish us. Maybe you succeed, maybe not. But by the time you do, if you do, the Holy Queen will be too powerful for you to handle. So I propose an alternative. We will join with you, considering only when Mark and its surrounding communities to be solely responsible for what was done to us. We will take the front, and harass the Queen's forces. This should give you a mighty edge in the opening stages of your war. All we want in exchange is a home of our own. Let the elves have the deep woods, prohibit enslaving us, and we will never trouble your race again. Is she serious? Astraka wondered. She sounded like it. He searched for a downside. Elven slavery was a nasty institution and he knew it. Useful in Wenmark and the surrounding areas, but as the recent tragedy showed, more trouble than it was ultimately worth. He still recalled how sick he felt on a trip to the Grim City as a young man. He could never quite grasp how anyone could do the things he saw being done to women. At least torture was clean. She must have been one of those. No elf this beautiful would have remained untouched in a place like that. Her request makes sense. It costs nothing, and if I control the labor force that reoccupies the mining districts and rebuilds Wenmark. The possibilities unfolded in his mind, and the answer crystallized in his head with such obviousness that he could see that she saw it in his eyes. HMPF, is that empathy I see in there for me? She asked and patted his cheek. You're not all bad, I suppose, but do we have a bargain? Squeeze your eyes tightly shut if we do. Ileana instructed, and he did as she said. Good, my elves will be following the wooded paths north. We still prefer to avoid your kind. When we see your army pass Yanana, we will do our part. Ileana promised, and remember, if you betray us, at least one elf can come to you at any time, and take your life, she said, and stood up. She then took up the blanket and covered him at the head saying, don't worry, the poison will wear off, it's really even better stuff than I thought. Ileana then went to the window, allowing him to hear her steps so he would think she was leaving that way. Then when the gate opened for her, she skipped through with glee, and found herself again in the room in the Northern Holy Kingdom that served as their headquarters. How did it go? Skarna asked as soon as Ileana returned. The green-eyed woman had a warm little smile on her face from where she sat at the table still scribbling out the clues that would suggest the slain theocracy was behind some of the corruption and upheaval in the Holy Kingdom. Ileana approached, gave a gentle hug to Skarna when the woman stood, and then sat down opposite her companion to explain. Very well. He has no idea how I got in or out and thinks I'm just really good at getting in and out of places. Duke Astraka was quick to agree, and I don't think we have to worry about being betrayed. All that we have to do now is... Skarna interjected with a casual wave and a most dismissive airy roll of her hand at the wrist. Fight your way across the Holy Kingdom while being hunted by Queen Kalka's entire army, hoping you're not betrayed by Astraka, and reach a wall meant to stop entire demi-human armies, while hoping the Queen of Frost joins the war and will also accept your entire population into her new kingdom and not be as bad as or worse than the humans. Is that all? How hard can that be? Ileana snapped her jaw shut. When you put it that way. The hand which had been reaching for a quill, stopped, hesitated, started to move again, then stopped as worries began to replace her earlier enthusiasm. No. Skana realized what a damper her cynicism had just thrust on the enthusiastic elf, and her mind raced against her mouth to try to fix it. Skana's face brightened with an envious smile. Things will be fine. Your people will make it, they'll get across the whole damn kingdom, they'll meet the Queen of Frost, she'll see their potential, their strength. She'll want them as her citizens. She'll take them in. Your people will be safe in the east. They'll have farms, and grow crops that will make Deem Albion the envy of east and west, north and south. And you'll go back with Our Lady, serve her faithfully, be safe and happy forever after. Everything will work out, Skana insisted, and it was enough for the elf woman to smile back. And after all these miracles come to pass, and it's all said and done, what will you do? Ileana asked, and the auburn-haired woman leaned back in her chair, her neck resting on the top of the backrest, staring at the ceiling. If you want the truth, I honestly don't know. It wasn't until I knelt before a living God that I ever realized how empty my wants were. I like sex. I like drinking. I like dancing. I'd be lying if I said I haven't enjoyed all this. In a strange sort of way. But I've never in my entire life done anything that wasn't really for me or for my own enjoyment. With all this over and more money than I know what to do with, I guess I'll buy a big house in the city, get some servants to boss around and... She shrugged. Do nothing, I guess? It seems kind of pointless now that I say it out loud. She straightened her head and glanced at her companion. Do you think maybe you could visit me sometime? Skana asked with a twinkle in her eye. If I'm allowed, I definitely will. Ileana replied with a bright-faced smile that wiped away the growing sense of emptiness in her friend, at least for the moment, and they returned with quiet studiousness to their work, until the doppelgangers returned to do the same. Weeks later, Gustav stood in private council with the Holy Queen. His burnished armor did nothing to hide the sting of his failure which he felt in his guts. It was written all over his face. You failed, didn't you? She asked. It wasn't said with rebuke, more as if she were a loving parent who knew from the start that their child had set their sights too high. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, he answered. There is no need for an apology now, Commander Montagna. She shook her head. I knew it was probably futile. I had hopes. But hope is something I can't rule by. That is why I had the army mustered while you were gone. We're still weeks away from full readiness. But we won't be caught completely off our guard by a nightmare. Gustav took a half-step back in dismay. Such a measure was expensive, high risk, and exactly the right thing to do. She seemed to take no notice of his dismay, her fingers wrapped in a steady rhythm on the table at which she sat. All the new nobles I appointed are eager to prove themselves. They're not complacent. They're not yet corrupt, and they won't have much time for corruption. For better or worse, the foundation for our kingdom's future lies with how we handle this war. Majesty. I'm sure you're right, Gustav said, certain at least that he was speaking the truth, and he turned a thought to the last conversation he had with the Queen of Frost. What will we do with Pabel and his wife? Kalka's hard eyes became harder, her fingers stopped drumming, her other hand stiffened on the armrest of her burnished dark wooden seat. If she wouldn't have avoided war because we have them, they would not make good hostages overall. But I intend to keep them alive, and treat them well. Like guests who can't leave. Remedios delivered them with a bruise on her father's face, which I had healed, and I won't have another hand laid on them. Gustav. Our best hope here is survival. And that means I do not need to create long-term grudges. I can't stop from using her family, but I think I can ensure that she won't mistreat our people out of some desire for revenge, as long as they are kept alive and unharmed. They're leverage for after the war, not before it. She cleared her throat, and Gustav did the same. He kept back his private thoughts. This version of Kalka is far more sensible than the old one. But I will miss that starry-eyed loving belief. That absurd idealism that we could really make a perfect kingdom. We killed it, all of us. And now there are 2 Queen of Frosts in our part of the world. And having one of them is the only reason we'll survive. He was proud of her, he pitied her, he wanted the old queen back and couldn't wait to see what this new Kalka would do next. A whirlwind of thoughts and emotions rampaged through his mind, and it all came together in a single thought. I have a job to do. Whatever his queen was about to say next was cut off when Kelet burst into the room without knocking. She was panting, breathing hard, her eyes wild and her hair in disarray. The demi-humans? Queen Kalka exclaimed and shot to her feet at the same moment that Gustav turned to look at the sudden disturbance, his hand instinctively going for the hilt of his sword before seeing who it was. Kelet rushed within, slamming the door behind her. No, Your Majesty. It's the South. The Southern Holy Kingdom has declared themselves for Caspond, and they have invaded. Yanana has already fallen, towns and villages are being abandoned and pillaged. They demand that you abdicate the throne immediately. Queen Kalka's jaw set tight as she took that in. How could things get any worse? Give me that wall, Nia bellowed from where she hovered in front of her horde, her wings batting slowly to keep her bobbing aloft. Her sharp taloned finger pointed the way ahead, and the humans who looked down at her from above looked on in total horror. Correct me if I am wrong, partner, but isn't it customary to catch the enemy by surprise? Olisar Dark asked from where he stood beside her while the demi-humans rushed past. Yes. But their vision isn't especially good. I want them to know I'm coming for them. I want them to break, run and spread the word. They can't do that if they fall all over themselves and die in the dark. There's a time for shadow and stealth, and there's a time to really put on a show. This is our opening gambit, and there's no better time to create terror in their minds. Nia answered without looking up at him. Now, are you ready for your part? They'll be in arrow range soon. Ready? Olisar Dark said to the dragonid. Was she like this when she was fully human? She sounds dragonish. He wondered, her fearsome gaze, steady, unflinching, focused on her goal above all else. It was hard not to favor such a person, and when she gave the nod, he rose aloft and sped toward the wall. His icy breath swept the top. The cries of humans went up in alarm as the dragon brought death from above, ice swallowing up bodies and stopping hearts in chest after living chest. The few who loosed their arrows, forgot their demi-human targets, and the pathetic steel points bounced off his naturally armored skin. From her place at the rear, Nia looked on in disbelief as she saw the unthinkable happen. The portcullis is opening. They're opening the gate. Is it a trap? She wondered, or do we have unknown allies over there? The Queen of Frost wondered. There was one certain way to know for sure. She took off as fast as her wings could carry her. The bow on her back still waited for use in its custom leather sheath. She shot between the lines of her roaring warriors, and saw humans killing humans. Allies. We have allies. She cried out in her head with mental elation and rushed back through the way inside. She let out a dragonid battle roar and pointed to the way within. Though many of her own were already climbing the walls and toppling stone, many more were waiting their turn, and the option of an easy way in was not to be ignored. Orcs, Spriggans, Nagas, Trolls, Baffolk, and countless others barreled through, and like a dam that burst above an unsuspecting town, the courtyard was flooded. The tens of thousands of soldiers who held the fortress were still pouring out of their positions, charging forward and howling for blood. Nia took a man by the throat, ascended into the air. Her sharp ears heard his gurgle, his limbs flailing about, his weapon dropped far below. The roar of battle rose like the noise of a storm. The smell of blood and less noble fluids filled the air. The wind raced by her chilly body, and the Queen of Frost got a good long look at the warrior of her former homeland. He was young, barely a man. And his terrified eyes were filled with the realization that he was about to die. His struggle to escape her grip became a struggle to hold on. His legs tried to wrap around her, his hands grabbed at her arms and wrist, but he was easily batted away. Part of Nia screamed at herself over what she was about to do, but down below, her people were fighting, dying, and pressing the humans to the breaking point. Goodbye, she said, and let go. Watching for only a few seconds, he screamed, hands and legs flapping about trying to find something in the empty air to grab onto, some lifeline that didn't exist. She winced a little when he landed. He hit not the ground, but a clump of his own people, his body shattering and dying instantly, and leaving several other humans equally dead or seriously injured. Nia then angled herself down, and dove back into the fray, heading for the gate that held the army in and prevented escape. They are near breaking. Give them a way out, and it's over. She knew without a doubt. The side gate was less well guarded now, the breach point having drawn the most violence to it. Not even 20 yards away they were packed like apples in a barrel, but where she landed at the door, there was nobody. At least, not there. Nia folded her wings in and began to go up the stone steps, the noise of the outside hiding the echo of her footsteps. She wound her way up to the top where the wheel could be found, along with the crewmen to man it. A single oaken door stood in her path at the top, a troublesome obstacle a lifetime ago. Her talon-tipped hands went back, then thrust forward to dig into the wood. They sank in as if it were soft and moist. She then gritted her teeth, and tore it away from where it sat, casting it down the stairs behind her to tumble and splinter out of view before it came to a stop. The little skeleton crew meant to defend the interior of the gate immediately went for their swords. They were not front-line soldiers, and wore only leather armor or banded mail, though they carried short swords ideally for their confined space. They were ill-suited for war in the same way as paladins or even squires. Nia charged, her hand caught one at his wrist. She twisted, snapping a bone and cutting off the scream by thrusting her other hand into his throat. The blood poured out like a fountain as she spun and droplets hurtled about before letting go of him, sending the dying unfortunate as a missile weapon into his charging companions. They tumbled like the little wooden pins used in 9-pin bowling, a pile of tangled and struggling limbs. She approached them before they could dislodge themselves, slashed her talons out, and a spattering of blood on stone brought stillness to the room. The Dragonid Queen then went to the wheel that controlled the portcullis, a large metal piece with multiple handles meant for 2 grown men to move, and with her newfound strength she began to do it herself. The chain was on a long cylinder which she could see rotating, confirming her success. It went up, and the wrapping of the chain became thicker and thicker, until she pulled and felt it stop. On the wall beside her was a long metal rod, which she took with one hand and shoved it into the break, a series of aligned holes that would stop the chain from going back down. Now one more thing, she said to herself, and went to a spot where a large horn stuck out, meant for signaling the soldiers. The experienced kingdom warrior knew them all by heart. She puckered her lips, and blew the retreat. She then looked out the little arrow slit to see the result. The horn's triple bellow drew the eyes of both sides, and between both the call to retreat and the easy escape route she just offered, the wavering men of the Holy Kingdom broke. They broke and ran, some casting aside swords and shields, others making desperate valiant last stands of their own, only to be overrun. Men died on their bellies as demi-humans jumped at their backs, others died when they stumbled, fell, and were trampled by their own people. Nia forced herself to watch. This was your country, she told herself, and with a bitter snarl she said aloud, was. And watched with unblinking blue eyes until there were no humans left within, and her army began to cheer their victory. Volume 6 C21. Attack, Nia bellowed the word and her advanced guard charged the lightly fortified position. Remember, take captives. Lots of captives. She added the instruction to the horde. The orcs and spriggans, she noticed, were the best about that. Less so the Bafolk, Spiderfolk, Nagarfolk, and others. However, the rock spitters were little tested. They remained behind, foregoing glory for the sake of easy victory. Their stones flew overhead and forced the human archers to remain behind concealment and either fire blind or get hit. Using her knowledge of Holy Kingdom archery doctrine, her rock spitters now used a system of rotating fire. Drilled day after day, they kept up a volley that surpassed the rate of the humans, and because of her time in service, she knew where the archers were likely to be placed at most of the fortifications they encountered. Olisar Dark remained at the back, watching with quiet curiosity as the Dragonid in her forest green scale armor hovered over her army and barked orders left and right. Unable to fire accurately, the human fortification, which should have held out for hours or even days except against exceptional enemies, was instead overrun in minutes by her advanced detachment. Her flying column was outnumbered, and yet it didn't matter. What could they have done to my country if someone wanted to use them for slaughter? She shuddered to even think of it, and then slowly descended to the center of the little fort. She strode through the bloody dirt where a small cluster of humans died in a last desperate stand, and approached her detachment leader. "My queen?" Nazreen said, and gave a little half-bow while her group of elite Maelus bound the trembling human captives with spider silk. "Yes, Nazreen?" Nia asked, pausing in her walk toward a group of wounded humans. She glanced up at the towering demi-human. Is it necessary to spare so many? Will this not cause trouble to guard such numbers? She asked, the question's implicit meaning, though unspoken, was should we not execute most of them? Naya folded her wings against her body and shook her head. She reached up to scratch at the white bone horn that rose up to a tip at an angle just beyond and above her forehead. Not really. Are you saying your people can't handle them? The white blank-faced being shrugged all of her multiple arms at once. Not at all, my queen, but so many are a challenge to house, feed, and guard. If we kill half, we can feed the rest the meat of their comrades, or our own forces, and this will all be easier. Unless your majesty has some sentimental reason for not wanting to slaughter humans? It wasn't phrased as a criticism. The Maelus queen's hands opened as if to say it is nothing, but it wasn't. Naya fixed the woman with a long, steady glare. A silent war, the child of the mad-eyed archer, bearer of his gaze and augmented by her now dragonid nature, brought down the hammer of fear on the one-time ruler of 1/6 of the Abelian Hills, until Nazarene looked away. The smell of human urine at the unspoken threat wasn't lost on anyone, but only after the demi-human leader had turned her face from the quiet threat, did Nyabarahu speak. The humans will be bound by oaths and hostages to their good behavior to not escape their captivity. Send them back to the Abelian Hills and set them to working for us. They will finish our construction projects under the guard of our elders and young, while supervised by dark dwarves. They will be fed from the food they grow for themselves, and when the time comes, we will trade their lives for concessions from either the Holy Queen or the Holy King. The white-fleshed demi-human felt her heart race as she understood what just happened. Never accuse me of sentiment when it comes to humans. They betrayed me, ruined me, tried to kill me. Naya approached the white-faced female, though she had to look up to meet her eyes. Her wings popped out and after a beat or two they were eye to eye. The frost breath wafted over the Maelus of near-legendary status, and she whispered, "Undermine me again, Nazarene, I dare you." No insult was intended. My queen. Your generosity to my people is worthy of our loyalty. She tried to walk back her words, but the Queen of Frost would have none of it. See to all the human captives. If you are so worried about their escape, you will be in charge of ensuring that they don't. You will be responsible for defending the wall and establishing the prison work camps beyond it to build up more of our towns. You will not take the easy route. The strong make long roads, the weak make short ones, and the dead make none. Am I understood, Nazarene? It wasn't technically a demotion. In theory, one of the most powerful demi-humans had just been put in charge of a great fortress and a massive project. In practice, to a population who built their names on glory and strength, she had been relegated to a rear position to where success would bring glory to her mistress, and her name would barely be mentioned in stories that spread about the conflict ahead. Vijar. Naya called over her shoulder when she approached the hastily working Maelus who were busy binding the wrists of their human captives even faster than before as their queen's eyes fell on them. A towering catman swaggered forward, cocky and confident. He had his nose a little turned up when walking past the ruler of the Maelus and knelt before the dragonid, waiting for her to turn around to face him. Naya glanced at the mighty demi-human. He was ruthless, but absolutely loyal to the well-being of his tribe. Her return of the captives she took, before any fighting, won him over almost immediately. I'm sure that if I permitted him to consume humans for food, he would think nothing of it, but of the great powers, he is one of the greatest. As good a left hand as to Raven. Naya turned to face him. Vijar, you will take the lead position in the attack on the next city, exercise caution and seize the outlying villages and towns first. Remember, minimize casualties. Captives can work, captives can be bargained away. Take special care to seize their counselors and artisans. But as for their aged, their young children? Those who flee will consume supplies and most of them will be worthless in a fight. We have lessons to teach the queen, and this kingdom, am I understood? Yes, my queen. But why their artisans and counselors? Vijar asked, his head cocked to one side very much like a confused dog who saw something odd and unaccountable. Naya, however, was prepared for his answer. Do you think fools built the wall that kept the Abelian Hills at bay for hundreds of years? She exaggerated a little, but it made her point. Strength comes in many forms. Some ways you are great, others, they are. The humans split their warriors from scholars and scholars from warriors. That makes cowards their thinkers and their fighters, fools. Taking their best and wisest men and women, and making them ours means we can have strength and wisdom both. And I need both to make our kingdom. Or do you want to be beholden to the dark dwarves for everything we need? Had it been a more foolish commander, Naya might have simply barked the order that it be done, or glared in silence until fear brought obedience. But I have to get them all to understand me. Willing obedience is better than forced obedience, and if they all support my long-term plans, they are far more likely to succeed. So instead, after explaining herself to Vajar, she simply watched him with dispassionate curiosity as the wheels turned behind the whites of his eyes until she saw understanding dawn. The sight of the castle rising in their new capital was no more lost on him than any, and it was that, she was sure, that reached him. It will be as our queen commands. Prisoners will be taken, the elderly and young allowed to flee. Our kingdom will have its workforce. Vajar reiterated and rephrased her instructions, and left to tend to her orders. Another obstacle overcome. Naya thought with satisfaction. While not far away, the funeral pyre for the dead began to send smoke up into the air, letting everybody know for many miles around, that the Frost Queen had struck. Volume 6 C22. There was a time when Kalka thought every cheer was genuine. There was a time when she believed her people loved her as one might a mother. But now when she sat on her throne and listened to the cheers for her army outside? The South has declared for Caspond. Or independence. How nice of them to give us an option. The demi-humans are invading. And I don't believe for one second that those are coincidences. The South sold us out to the Queen of Frost. The grim thought was paired with her doubts. They are cheering because we're not killing them. Her face was a mask of flint, devoid of expression or happiness. She lifted her eyes to look at Kellett when the slender brown-haired woman put a hand on her shoulder. Let Gustav do his work, my queen. And let my stupid sister do the one thing she is actually good at. It was the most withering praise Kalka had ever heard in her life, about anyone. Between her words and the presently unkempt hair of her advisor, it spoke volumes about where her head was at. You had the army raised, that was the foresight we needed. The soldiers of the South are not as good as ours. Kellett squeezed the queen's shoulder when she felt Kalka shiver a little. Gustav can beat them. And demi-humans are formidable, but so is my sister, in this at least. Any further conversation in the otherwise empty throne room was ended when a boy rushed in, breathing hard. He wore a page boy cut, hair trimmed near to his ears, and he could not have been older than 10. His brown eyes were big enough to draw notice, and he was of very slight build. More notably, he was well dressed in colors not of the Holy Kingdom. A tabard over his white uniform bore the insignia of the Kingdom of Nazarick. Kalka and Kellett tensed at once as the boy rushed in and knelt before the throne. His eyes went down as he rested his arms over one knee. Queen of the Roblay Holy Kingdom, His Majesty, All-Father of the Kingdom of Nazarick, has heard your call for aid and sends his answer. She felt her throat tighten. Words wouldn't come out, though she couldn't say it to Kellett. The Holy Queen's doubts about what to do were such that abdicating seemed like the best possible answer to save her nation. The messenger boy waited for her orders, but though her lips moved, no words came out. Kellett folded her hands behind her back beside the throne, and after clearing her throat said, "The Queen will hear the words of her royal brother of the Kingdom of Nazarick." The boy reached into a brown leather pouch and withdrew a scroll. Rather than hand it over, he unfurled it and, holding it tightly open at the top and bottom, he read out loud. His Majesty the All-Father hears the plea of his royal sister, and sends aid to her in this dire time. Within days of the receipt of this message, Her Royal Majesty will be given 500 sets of rune-crafted armor and weapons with which to equip her elite soldiers. Kalka found her voice immediately. Rune what? The page boy seemed prepared for this, as he lowered the scroll and raised his eyes to her and said, "Runecraft is a means of creating magic items at no material cost, Your Majesty. It can only be made by the dwarves who live under my lord's service." No-cost magic items? Kellett exclaimed before her queen could truly comprehend the implications. 500 sets. She furrowed her brow. Shall I continue, my lady?" the boy asked. The queen nodded. "In addition, our All-Father has offered to render his personal magical aid to ensure your success. As to compensation for his efforts, this can be discussed at length on his arrival with his shipment of material aid." The boy then rolled up the scroll and bowed his head before extending it toward Kellett. The advisor stepped away from the throne and accepted the document, her footfalls audible on the stone in the otherwise silent chamber until she ceased to move when she was again at Kalka's side. Then, "I await his lordship's arrival with great anticipation," Kalka said after a moment's hesitation. She then glanced up at her advisor. "Kellett, join me in my quarters." Then looking at the young boy as she rose to her feet, "Go to the kitchens, eat your fill, then return to your master. But warn him of the danger of the demi-humans. We have not yet gotten a handle on them." "Not to worry, my lady." The boy beamed up at her, his bright, soft face took on a cherubic blush with a contented smile. "I am very good at not being seen, and nothing can harm my master." The doppelganger kept quiet in a laugh, and made his retreat as quickly as the royal left the hall. Kellett's feet moved like those of a jig dancer at a peasant festival, her eyes were wide as saucers as she followed after her queen. Never that the long-haired priestess could recall had Queen Kalka Besawayas moved so quickly in her castle, except the one time she was forced to flee from it. Kalka did not wait for Kellett to catch up, nor did she wait for the guards at the door of her quarters to open the room for her. She walked in, grabbing the knob herself to walk past and leaving it open for Kellett to close when she followed. As soon as the queen and her comrade were alone, Kalka rushed to her makeup counter with the towering oval mirror. An enchanted item, the mirror could show her both the front and back of her head without needing to be moved, making it easy for her to do her hair herself or to see a servant's progress. She snatched up a brush made of wyvern bone and prickle beast spines and began to draw it through her hair in swift but practiced motions. For a long time neither the queen nor Kellett spoke, the queen only gave a steady swallow and a gulp. Kellett raised and lowered her hands several times to help her queen with the long flowing golden strands. It was a common routine for them both, but now it felt different. "May I help, your majesty?" Kellett finally stumbled out the words, and the queen stopped in mid-brush. "Yes," Kalka answered succinctly, but rather than hand the brush to her best-loved servant, she said, "I offered to marry the Allfather. You know this, don't you?" Kellett gave a little nod. Her lips sealed tight as a drum, the queen could see the nod in the mirror and resumed brushing. "I don't know anything about him, not really. His magic is powerful, he is tolerant of other creatures, beings, races, at least tolerant enough that the slain theocracy has taken issue with his kingdom in private. They even reached out to me to sign off on a joint letter of condemnation. Which I refused, of course." Kalka answered and a little smile formed on her face that twitched a little, but held. "That was for the best. I doubt he would come to our aid if we had condemned his practices. But as long as he is a good king to his people, it should be fine. Right?" "All right, your majesty," Kellett answered, but Kalka heard the hesitation. She looked over her shoulder, away from the mirror. "You don't approve?" Kalka asked. "Your majesty, demi-humans have always been our enemies. Anyone friendly with them is someone we should at least be suspicious of," Kellett pointed out. "It was humans who tried to kill me, and humans whom I fled from, who drove me out of my very capital, remember. It wasn't demi-humans," Kalka said rhetorically. "The demi-humans are invading because one of us killed a royal envoy. The elves are rebelling because we kept them as slaves. From the moment the Allfather took his throne, what little I have heard has suggested a wise king who got all races to agree to his rule. While we have only made enemies inside and outside of our borders," Kalka added, her voice bitter and frustrated. She threw her brush down to the floor where the bone clattered on the stone and skittered away. Kellett moved to fetch it while the queen sat, but the ruler of the Roble Holy Kingdom did not sit in silence. "He is wise, at least. But if I marry him for the sake of peace, for help ending the danger to my people, I will need to produce an heir for us to unite the two kingdoms, and I—" "Oh," Kellett said when she picked up the brush and returned to her queen. Rather than give back the brush, she began to attend the long golden strands herself. Queen Kalka had no experience in intimacy. Rumors of the lust between herself and her queen were thoroughly false, and Kellett was sure that rumors of dalliances with her sister and the queen were equally so. "My queen, I realize what this means for you, but you won't be expected to leave the Holy Kingdom. And it was always going to be necessary to have an heir for the throne," Kellett said, and Kalka answered. "I know this. I've considered various candidates before, high-ranking southern nobles, even theocracy cardinals, but knowing it, and being prepared for it are not the same. Do you know anything? Vigorous kings tend not to want to wait till wedding nights." Kalka blushed just a little at her cheeks, and Kellett stared down dumbly for a moment as the question sank in. Worldly enough not to blush, and only caught off guard enough to slow down in brushing, she cleared her throat. "I do know a few things. I will tell you what I can." Kalka pricked up her ears, and listened in earnest for every scrap of knowledge the masterful caster held on an entirely different sort of magic than either usually used. Volume 6 C23. A dozen humans of Queen Kalka's army were riding on light, young horses. Far from being the most heavily armored scouts, they wore little armor, favoring speed and maneuverability. They were scouts, wearing leather helmets with only a little metal sewn into the lining to offer some protection. The road they marched over was simple hard-packed earth. Funding for paving it was simply never available. If anyone asked the nobles why not, the answer would always be, peasants don't need to travel that much. But it made the going much slower for soldiers who did, not that the nobles gave it any real thought before. The humans carried bows and short spears, good enough for defense, self-provision, and intimidation if they encountered any of the usual hostile elements. The elves smiled from the shadows, happy in their good fortune. These soldiers left a village behind not long before. Nobody would come for them for some time. 6 elves knocked their arrows, drawing their bows so slowly that the creaking noise of the bending wood was almost non-existent. "Are you going to let them have you again?" the giant bear of an elf bellowed, and the marching humans turned their heads toward the sound of his shout. Arrows flew from the wilderness and pierced the eyes of the armored humans. A second flight of arrows was in the air to pierce the eyes of those who survived the first volley before they could even open their mouths to shout. Bodies fell over, dead without ever knowing what killed them or why. "Search them," the largest elf barked, "see if they have any information, then take any food, arrows, or anything else we can use, then leave the rest behind." He barely needed to utter the command. Some of the smaller elves rushed out to do as he ordered, their feet silent as the distant rising sun as they ate up the ground under their rapid steps. Nobody expected to get more than a handful of extra arrows out of it. And of course, some satisfying payback on the way to the east to meet the Queen of Frost. And that was plenty. Heinz held his head high. The messenger he dispatched in the form of a young boy was one of his doppelgangers. Cheap summons, their loss in the event of death was fairly meaningless. In no small part thanks to that girl and her teacher. Sabos found someone very useful in her. The Baharuth Empire's magical research was more than a little noteworthy, with means of scribing scrolls quickly. Though at some cost in animals, it offers great potential for the future. And so the use of doppelgangers to simulate the royal procession of a visiting monarch went smoothly. Nobody was the wiser that it was almost a total fiction, and Dines was in fact spending most of his time in Nazarick. It should reach demi-human ears before long, and in accordance with my plan. Albedo's plan. Heinz corrected the thought and paused for a moment to let his heart find its rhythm again. They will set out to capture me or disrupt me. Finding a few scraps of runecraft to spark their interest. Heinz looked at the mirror of remote viewing. He couldn't read lips, but the doppelganger attendants were explaining the Kingdom of Nazarick's view of non-humans. That much he was sure of. Another path that may worm its way to the ear of the Queen of Frost. Heinz considered, and looked over his shoulder when he felt the gentle touch of Albedo. He immediately stopped caring when he saw that her yellow eyes, bright as the sun, were dulled and wet with pools of tears. My lord?" She had weak knees, they were clearly shaking. The hand she put up on his shoulder was the only thing holding her up. In her other hand she held one of the letters dispatched to him. Heinz knew what it was. The request for aid from Queen Kalka. The document included an offer of marriage. "My lord. Is she? Are you? If it pleases you so much, I don't have to look like me. I can be her. I am a succubus. I can be anything you want me to be." She half cried out, half whimpered, aspect of the succubus, object of desire. And then Albedo was not Albedo. Instead the slender blonde, the radiant and beautiful queen of the Roble Holy Kingdom, Kalka Besserez, was in her place. A perfect likeness. She smiled a tiny bit. "You see, I can offer you endless variety. I can be anything. Everything. As long as I am in your arms." She dropped the paper while he turned to face her, and wrapped her arms around his neck, rising up on her tiptoes to almost hang off of his body. "I don't care if I'm me or not. As long as I am yours." "Albedo. That isn't." "Yes," she offered, but Heinz felt sweat spring to his face. Part of him wondered if he should call for guards, or restrain her before she lost all reason. Nobody knows I've come back yet, but if I know, I can handle her myself if I must. Privacy is such a rare thing. I should have sent her away again. Never did he hate himself more than when he had that thought. Albedo, he tried to speak again, the Queen doesn't know me. I do not know her. She offers me marriage for diplomatic purposes. To unite our kingdoms rather than to lose her own. If my lord did not find her beautiful, this would not have worked, Albedo whispered. I can only appear as. She let the statement hang. Her lord's shaft was obviously speaking its own truth, undeniably, from such close proximity. It is true, Albedo said those three little words with the quiet voice of someone who has been condemned. Am I not beautiful enough as I am, my lord? It isn't for me to criticize your desires, but tell me how I failed you, she begged to know until he took her by the wrists and disengaged her gently from his grasp. She did not resist as she was set down, nor did she step closer when he stepped away. Albedo. Ines tried yet again, grasping for words that no level of wisdom could ever have offered. He threw off his mask so that she could see his face. You're the child of a dear friend. I should think of you like a daughter. I can only let myself love you that way. And I do. I love you all. My precious children. Albedo did not shrug off the illusion of Kalka's body in place of her own. My lord's manhood does not see me that way. It was hard, even at that moment, not to smile a little. She licked her lustrous ruby lips as if contemplating a fine meal. Ines could hardly have denied it, much as he wished to. Albedo. I can't. Will you be with? Albedo started to ask, then stopped. Her knees gave out and she went to the floor. Will you have her then? Ines' mind raced. I'm a virgin, damn it. I'm not prepared for this kind of thing. This is worse than when she and Shiltir argued over who would be the first wife. He screamed it in his head as he tried to find an answer. He went to her and put his hands on her cheeks. Albedo. I love you in levels that no numbers can measure. But I am a king. I will never love the Queen, whatever happens. It is all for the sake of making a world my children can be safe in, and a world my friends would be happy in. I can never be happy, and never be safe, if I am not nestled in your heart, Albedo said through shimmering eyes. It was strange to hear it in a voice he knew had to be Kalka's. A god such as you. Every woman you desire, as many wives as you like. Have them all, even if it includes that flat-chested lamprey. But let me be one of them. The words of the priest came back to her. I would feel this way. No matter what happened before the end and our new beginning. None of it would matter. Please, my lord. My love. The heart of the succubus raced like a fireball over a battlefield. If I can just make him understand that what he did was meaningless. If he could just see that. Albedo. Leave me to my thoughts. I have to prepare to meet the Queen. It was an excuse in his own mind, and not a particularly good one. The succubus, however, accepted his words. She got up to her feet, and said, My lord. When you meet her, and are alone with her, you will be a man with a woman. She will have certain expectations. If I have to accept this, by your will, I do. She is only a human toy and will die, while I endure forever. But the most important thing will be that first kiss. She will appraise everything about you at that moment. Tender, gentle, savage, brutal. Are you selfish or giving, a creature of lust, passion, reserve? She will judge my lord without even thinking about it. Ines had no idea what to expect her to say before leaving. This, though, wasn't on the list of possibilities. But the instant she drew herself up, he saw the why of it. She is my advisor, still, the supervisor of all the guardians, effectively my prime minister. Her job is to help me in everything, even in things she doesn't like. He nodded along with her, and tried very hard not to think about the impassioned dreams he was sure to experience again if he slept in his bed that night. She walked toward him. It was a sultry walk, even though it was barely 2 or 3 steps, it might as well have been a runway. Then she was in front of him, rising on her tiptoes. I am Queen Kalka Bessares, ruler of the Roble Holy Kingdom. The key to easy dominion over millions of humans. I have offered my body to the All-Father of Nazarick. I will be his wife, and give him title to my kingdom to save it from destruction. But I don't know him. I know nothing of his character, his will, his strength. In his first kiss, I will know more than in an hour of conversation. Now, kiss your queen, Albedo whispered in a dusky voice, her pheromones dialed up to 11. Hines put his arms around her, using his strength to raise her up just enough on her tiptoes. He brought his lips to hers, and let them part. He did not act the part of the aggressive, savage conqueror, but rather as the novice explorer of a new land, growing bolder with familiarity, savoring the warmth, heat, and taste of another person, the sound of deep breaths coming from both, until the moment passed. Albedo was the one to break the kiss, and he allowed her to do so, barely realizing what he'd done until she stepped away, just out of reach. The face of the foreign queen was a mask of professionalism. As expected of my lord. Do it just like that, and she will see you as she should. Now, as you will it, I leave you to your thoughts. Hines touched his hands to his lips as if he could not believe where they had been, and held them there for a long time after Albedo was away. Did I? What have I done? He asked himself, unsure of even how he should have felt about the moment, while absolutely certain about how he did feel. Albedo's return to her room went by the most unused paths. She was able to easily avoid interacting with anyone at all, making it back to her quarters unobserved by any, and she closed her door as stealthily as she could so that nobody would have even that light click to know she was there. She rushed into her inner chamber, the place where no maid was allowed to go, and flung herself down on the bed, her legs and arms spread out. She gazed at the ceiling above. My first kiss, Albedo sighed, and lay there all night unsure of whether to sing or cry or give in to her lusts until sleep came at last.